I think if we can build a contextual baseline, which is here's what we believe people will do, here's what the majority are doing, and here's what my customers are different, then that's where we get good at being customer centric, is like just understanding how they compare. We can do that with big data and we can do it with small data, we can do it with conversations. But I think it's about looking up and looking around is the most important first step.
Welcome to the SaleSage Podcast. I'm Brooks Canavesi, your host, and if you're tired of playing by the old rules, you're in the right place. We're here to give you an unfair advantage where AI becomes your secret weapon to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outperform the competition. No gimmicks, just real strategies that top performers are using to stay ahead. Ready to tip the scales in your favor? Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. I'm Brooks Canavesi. Thank you for tuning in to the SaleSage Podcast, where we explore the rapidly expanding world of AI and RevOps. Today, we are honored to be joined by Kate Minogue, who has a storied career working at big companies like Meta and Bank of Ireland, and comes from a background of data science, AI, ML, marketing, product development, and operations. She has an MBA and is a certified AI product manager. Kate currently works as strategy advising consultancy and also a fractional executive. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Brooks. It's so great to be here.
Awesome. So starting right from the top, Grok 2 was released this week, and I just wondered if you had any experience with it so far.
No, I haven't played around with it myself, have just been more following the discussion around it. Sometimes I find the discussion around these releases as entertaining as people's attempts at using them. Have you been using it yourself?
So I spent last night just kind of laughing and chuckling at some of the AI generations because it's an uncensored LLM and an uncensored image generation model that kind of gave people the idea of how far can I push this? And you just kind of, people go dark really fast, but there's definitely some hilarious and some beautiful images that were created. But it's just a really interesting thing to think about that XAI started less than a year ago, has already generated some foundational models, and they're training new models on upwards of 100,000 H100 GPUs for their new Grok 3 model that they'll be releasing towards the end of the year. But it's just wild to kind of see this foundational model campaign and just the competition amongst these large companies.
It is. It's so interesting. And I think particularly with companies like X and, like you said, models that are released with a label like uncensored on them, you get to see the full gamut of human behavior. And I think that's actually useful at this stage of AI, because I think, what is it, Joy Walwamini calls it, it's an evocative audit when you in public see like an emotional example of what can go wrong. And I think like we know now, over a decade later, the good and the bad of social media. Like we know how dark that can get, but we also know how light and how warm it can get. And that is just because it represents humanity. And I think that a lot of these models are going to end up in a similar space, and we're going to need to have similar conversations about how we regulate and how we control and how we intervene with the usage of those technologies. Because I think it was like a couple of years ago when they started to do, I think it was IBM rolled out a chatbot based on learnings from X, or was Twitter at the time, and it very quickly devolved into racism and hate speech. And I think that was within less than 24 hours. And there's always going to be those extremes. And I think sometimes the sooner we see them, the better, because it seems as if we are not able to block them before we deploy. So yeah, I do think when you combine social media with generative AI and you take the censorship or you take the limits away, people are going to push it to its absolute boundaries, and we're going to see the extremes quite quickly. So yeah, there's good and bad in seeing it, because at least we can then take an informed stance on it.
Yeah. Can you tell the listeners a major misconception of AI today? It's such a large field. It's been around growing for over 50 years. And now it's just getting sprinkled around. Can you just kind of elaborate on some of the misconceptions when you hear AI today in the marketplace?
Yeah, so I think one of them is that it's new. So I think I was chatting to some friends from school actually this week, and they're like, well, obviously, AI is very new, so we all now, and I was like, and like I know we'll get into kind of domains like sales and marketing later, but having come from marketing, and even in the last 12 months, seen thought pieces in big publications like Forbes and HBR and different like The Drum, leaders in marketing agencies saying, well, now we have to figure out what marketing will do with AI because it's new. And I'm like, oh God, these are some of the earliest use cases. So that it's new is definitely misconception number one. Misconception number two is probably that it's a silver bullet. I am just averse to anything that people think is a silver bullet, because nothing is. There's too much complexity. There's too much complexity in people. There's too much complexity in use cases. There's too much complexity in data. There's too much complexity in technology. And AI combines all of those. So it can't be a silver bullet. And I think that the two underlying misconceptions to the belief that it's a silver bullet are that it can solve all problems, that it just is a solution to all problems, which it isn't. There are much simpler solutions to some problems. And that there is just an assumed accuracy to AI, which there really, really, really is not. So I think that those are some things that we really need to tackle, and we need to tackle with education and literacy. And I think the third one, which is connected to the first, is that all AI is generative AI, is all AI. Like there's this conflation of what have I been exposed to versus what is the full universe of tools, technology, capabilities. And I think that, again, like the Grok example, there are pros and cons to the Trojan horse that is generative AI and the Trojan horse that was ChatGPT in terms of really getting conversations about the technology into the general population's kind of language and hands, because I think it will accelerate the literacy, the understanding, the comfort levels to a point that maybe then we can have broader conversations about different use cases and different types of AI. So sometimes I kind of start with a little bit of a cynical eye roll, and then I go, no, this might be the route to getting more people involved in the conversation. Because I read a book, probably 6-7 years ago now, called Life 3.0, which I'm sure you've come across in one way or another. And it was all about different use cases of AI, the ethical implications of AI, the existential questions about AI. Like that was a long time before OpenAI existed in any way, shape, or form. And a lot of those questions, and my favorite part of that book was the objective of the book was to enable more people to be involved in those conversations. And the book didn't achieve it, even though it was an excellent book. But I think OpenAI has done that, if it's done nothing else. It has enabled more people of more backgrounds to be involved in conversations around AI.
Yeah, I think is that Max Tegmark, Life 3? Yeah. So great book. Interesting analogy when he talks about the kind of mountain range and the flooding of like where AI will touch first. And it was very much in the robotic space and in the blue collar jobs, and that it would come for art and in some of these other things, they were the peaks of the mountains.
They were the last place it would go.
For those white collar jobs and the art and the writing, creative writing, it would come for those last as the waters rose up the mountain range in this analogy or proverbial sense. And it was kind of the opposite.
It was the opposite. And I think if that's not the perfect example of the fact that people will never do what you expect them to do, and people will never use technology in the way that you expect them to. And even if you roll out an AI or an algorithm that has a very narrow and specific use case for a very specific problem, people exist and they will do something else with it. And I think a lot of the reason he thought it would go for the blue collar jobs was because actually that's where he felt there would be the least resistance to adoption. So he was thinking adoption first rather than development first, which is, okay, we would welcome AI and automation to come into what's dangerous, where people don't want to be kind of on the front line. We would welcome AI and automation to come in to kind of boring tasks, things that are really rinse and repeat that, are not intellectually stimulating. And we would also welcome AI to come into jobs where we don't have the actual, the labor force today to deliver on the work. So I think one of the examples was the judicial system, particularly in the United States, where there's a known backlog of cases and, could you put robo judges in there? But I think that showed up a very quick ethical challenge and a compounding of existing biases and different issues that might happen. So he had a really logical direction that he thought things were going to come from, and they were going to be driven by appetite. But that's not how technology works. And unfortunately, the people who develop AI don't always think about the ultimate people who benefit from it or the jobs that it replaces. Like, they don't think about the employees. They don't think about the users in all cases. They think about like a specific use case or a specific problem that they can solve. The age-old question, can doesn't mean should. But I think that's why there is such an emotional and visceral reaction from creatives, because I guess that question, who asked for this? They were quite happy not to be augmented by AI or absolutely replaced by AI. And you still have jobs that people would love to have that support. And it's not maybe where the money exists. It's not where the low-hanging fruit exists. So we're not getting it. So I think that's actually just a really interesting case study in what happens versus what we think will happen or what we hope will happen, which we have to ask ourselves at every stage of this.
Yeah. And we know that, the current AI that we have today is getting extremely good at writing, content creation, answering questions, especially with new methodologies around advanced RAG and new base models having even more knowledge than before and other fine-tuning elements. For our listeners today, they're primarily AI enthusiasts and sales professionals, as you know. How do you see AI transforming roles for sales and marketing today and in the future?
Yeah, like I said, marketing to me is one of the, when you talk about AI being 50 years old, not one of the oldest use cases of AI, but definitely one of the most established, one of the most prevalent use cases of AI in the last 10 to 15 years. Like, if people want to know how Google and Meta are as big as Google and Meta are, it's because of AI and advertising. Like, that was the game changer of the the lowest margin industry that we've probably ever seen, which was automated digital advertising, and both of them just scaled it so well. And that has always focused on optimization. So it has focused on how can we most efficiently find the right person to show an ad to that is likely to convert, where convert means a variety of different things. So it's a very particularly digital sales journey. It obviously does work in terms of exposure of ads to kind of more brand advertising and things like that. But that is where the majority of that work has existed. In the last 2 years, the biggest developments in that have probably been around closing gaps in data. So where Apple in particular made changes to data privacy, that left a dent in the efficacy in particular of Meta's models, because they, for some advertisers or for some customers, lost 70% of the data that they had previously been working with. So the AI had to then be repurposed to get good at closing those gaps, like get good at, working in the in-between. And also, I think it has moved much more in an automation of advertising across decisions. Where it was automation of optimization, it got to, how many decisions can we take out of the hands of a campaign manager? And this is where I come back to that point with Max Tegmark, is which of these jobs do we want to replace? And does the individual in the seat want that work replaced? And I think that that's something that we definitely saw, say, when Google released UAC first in the kind of app marketing side of things. The people who had previously been running the ads were uncomfortable with the amount of control they had to give up. They were like, I don't trust that it's doing better than I was doing. I also worry I may lose my job. And what was really ironic was, at that time, in that early rollout of products like that, the salespeople in Meta and Google are selling it to the person it's going to replace. And that is just one of the biggest disconnects in terms of diffusion of innovation is like, here's a tool that does your job. No, thank you. I don't want a tool that does my job or does it better than me or is cheaper than me. So that's kind of where we've come from. I think where we're going is probably twofold. So for marketing, the two places that it seems to be, there's more investment is in the creative side of things. So can we use all of the great technology, great research in generative AI on the creative side and make great ads, great personalized ads, more ads, that don't fatigue as quickly in these systems? Can we kind of take that optimization to the next stage and make it actually inform the ads that go out there? I think there's a growth of AI, again, as an extension of that data privacy piece to close gaps in data that don't exist. So it's almost not creating synthetic data sets, but adding intelligence in between the data points that we have to inform the data points that we don't. On the sales side, the biggest problem I'm seeing in sales teams at the moment, and a lot of the ones that I think of are either B2B or B2B2C, is there's such a push to productivity in the last 2 years. So, productivity is a good thing. Like, I don't mean to say it like it's a dirty word, but I think the way that it's come about, particularly in the tech industry, post-pandemic, in the midst of layoffs, it does have a dark cloud over it when, you have a senior executive talking about productivity in companies where people are like, is the outcome of this that seats will be left empty? And the thing that I don't like about what I'm seeing about productivity is it's, that saying, there's no point being efficient at something you shouldn't be doing. So you have a lot of productivity KPIs being put on sales teams, which is number of calls to your client, number of opportunities logged, number of touch points, number of X, Y, and Z. And it's so generic and it assumes a lot about, am I important in my client's life? And I think that AI can help there by potentially smartening those productivity metrics. So if I think of some of the salespeople that I know that are excellent at their jobs and would always have a really good finger on the pulse of, when do I need to talk to my client? When is the right time to talk to them? What works for them? What works for me? What works for their business? And now they're told, talk to your client every week, regardless what they want. You're left with an irritated client. You're left with a disillusioned salesperson, and you're not left with more revenue. You're left with KPIs that are being ticked for productivity reasons. So what I would love to see is, after this stage of productivity for productivity's sake, the AI can come in and go, okay, you know what? Maybe we don't have a one size fits all frequency of touch points. Maybe we can suggest the frequency of touch points based on size of business, what has worked before, the cadence we previously talked to them, all of these different factors, and start to relate those to KPIs so that salespeople are focusing on the right things. Because too often, if you give a metric, you're giving salespeople something that they will deliver for you, but maybe they shouldn't. So I really feel if AI can come in at the right point of that journey, and be an enabler to the right behaviors around productivity, the right way to assess on a client by client basis, because that's where AI is useful. It's when there's complexity and uncertainty and a lot of decisions to be made. And if you're saying, okay, you've got 100 clients, you've got 5 clients to 2 different salespeople, and you could just give them 2 different tiers of productivity, the AI might come in and go, do you know what? No, I can help you with that. So the salesperson does what the salesperson does well. And I think that's the bit we're missing. I think there's a lot of work in the other things. I think there's a lot of work on things like chatbots for salespeople, a lot of work on note-taking, assistance and things like that. All of those things will have efficiency gains, But I think that we need to look at the bigger picture of like, what are the pain points that are appearing? What are the priorities that exist in these organizations? What are the sales teams struggling with? And if the sales teams are struggling with a micromanagement from above that is not fitting what their clients need, then can AI help there instead of in ways that is uncomfortable for the teams and the people that know best?
Yeah, I think that's really profound. Human intuition of these great salespeople, the elite, they have that. They've worked with these customers long enough. They've been in the profession long enough that they can kind of, it's almost a gut, right? It's a feel where it's like, I need to talk to them at this frequency, at these time frames. They're open to a weekend text. They are not open to that. And you kind of feel that out, and it starts to become intuition for a really good salesperson. But there are some data aspects that we can start to mine that AI could start to provide better frequency, just like you said. It could just be based on industry. It could be based on company size. It could be based on role and just past experience. Where have our salespeople had success with this type of like persona in the past?
And how can we use AI to validate to leadership what the sales teams know to be true so that the sales teams are left to do the right thing? Because sometimes we trust data more than people when we should probably trust people more than data. And if we can just get the data to align, that can help a lot of people. Like I remember very early in my career when I was building churn models for customer marketing, one of the terms that I learned was let sleeping dogs lie. Like you do not always have to contact somebody. Sometimes the best thing you can do for retention of a customer is leave them alone if they're the right persona for that. And when you have a generic productivity-based approach and you don't trust your sales teams to do what they do well, then a model or a system that allows for the nuance and the flexibility to say, no, I believe that X% of customers are probably sleeping dogs, and I think that I trust the salespeople to identify who they are, and we will build our goals around the rest of the customers or around the size and the frequency that makes sense. So I think there's a lot more we could actually utilize AI in that uncertainty and complexity. But I think the question leadership should be asking in sales and marketing is what are the gaps that AI can fill that will allow our experts to do what they do best? Not how can we replace people to be cheaper, but actually let's start with the things that AI does better, but also look at the things that people do better and try to buy them more time to do it.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to an interesting thing I've been thinking about and reading a bit about as well. So traditional models, at least in the US, were if you want to get a higher paying career, you want to specialize. So you go to school, then you go to school again, right? Master's degree, then you might get a PhD. And if you're just basically going from a generalist, maybe in high school or undergrad, right, to more specialized graduate and maybe even postdoc or PhD work. And that's like that path to I'm going to be the expert, the subject matter expert in this space. And that's a, kind of career. I would get paid more. I would have a more successful career if I was highly specialized. That was the model of education, at least in the US, and I think in Ireland as well, for a long time. With AI, some of what I've been reading, and this is even 2 years ago, was around as AI grows, it's going to be smarter than the smartest specialist ever in a specific area. It's just going to have read all of the legal text, right? Not just some of it, because it's impossible for a human to read all of it, right? It will have done all of this experimentation and cycles and physics and other things, where the generalists might be a more valuable hire with the age of AI for sales, marketing, and other positions across the organization. I just kind of wondered what your thoughts are on that topic as well, around generalists and specialists.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. And definitely when you think about it from a sales and marketing perspective, one of the specialisms that comes up a lot is maybe domain expertise, vertical expertise. I want to hire somebody who knows retail. I want to hire somebody who knows finance. And I think that there is definitely an opportunity for AI to close those gaps. To be like, "Do you know what? No, get somebody with excellent sales skills in, and let the AI be their knowledge repository. Let them ask the questions that they need to. Let them ask it for the context." I think that makes a lot of sense. I think as well, it's funny as you go through your career, there's points where specialism is really, really valued. And then there's points where all of a sudden it's like, but have you done all of these things? And it seems to just happen suddenly. You wake up after years in a specialist career and it's like, oh, were you doing that? Maybe you should go broader now. So I do think at a certain leadership point in particular, breadth is valuable because they want big picture. They want you to be able to stand outside the box. They want you to be able to put context. They want you to, look industry level, look economy level, all of those things. So I think that there is, maybe it's less specialist generalist and it's more, well, what are the resilient skills that will mean that actually if AI goes really deep on this, what makes me the person that is better to use that AI than somebody else, better to channel that AI, better to strategize around that AI. And I think a lot of those skills, and I think we see this now with, say, performer management consultants and things like that, that are like, they're brought in and it's like, okay, we think that you've seen this in enough places that we trust that you can put the building blocks in place to do this for us because you've had that arm's length view. And I think that is probably the most prevalent generalists that are in the market are the management consulting professional, because that has been their bread and butter to a large extent, is like not going deep on any specific thing, but like having that purview. I still think there's going to be space for specialists in other parts of companies, because to your point about the LLMs building the expertise, I would love for us to get there to a point where we can trust the verification of information, of misinformation, of those different things that is coming out of it. But I think we'll need experts to help us do that. We'll need the human in the loop. We'll need people who can verify the output. We'll need people who can understand nuance that maybe machines aren't so good at. And we'll need people who design the workflows that are great because they're specialists that we then have the AI replicate. So I don't think specialists will be gone, but I think there will be more of a career strategizing that says this feels like where we're going to continue to need people to go really, really deep. Some of those roles likely don't exist yet, but I do think specialists will be needed to even just feed the future data that the AI will be built upon.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think specialists are going to be the mechanics in the shop, right? With the AI
Yep.
training, fine tuning, human reinforcement learning feedback, like all the things, right? From that perspective. And then the generalists are going to have a field day with an AI that has all that specialized knowledge where they can do a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sales, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I got to build a new policy. Cool. AI can help me with that. And that's where like those efficiency gains really start to go through the roof. I think of you as a specialist in a lot of areas, but you have a lot of areas. So it kind of makes you a generalist just with deeper experience in a lot. But I love that because my colleague and co-founder, Mike Karuska, calls me like a chainsaw sized Swiss Army knife.
So that has to have felt good the first time you heard it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I pride myself on that, especially as from a sales perspective. I really love being able to relate to people on a multitude of topics, not just highly technical. I'm a computer science background. That's what I was trained in to be a software engineer. But I'll talk to people about fishing or hunting or, hiking or wakeboarding or kiteboarding, and having that multitude of like hobbies and knowledge from a sales perspective helps you carry a conversation, whether it's about food or wine or whatever the case may be. So just rewinding a bit, knowing that you have this kind of broad array of experiences, and now you're a fractional executive helping out from product to operations to, AI, ML, and data science. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the decisions and opportunities that maybe, from childhood that kind of led you to this point?
Yeah. So I had so many different ideas when I was in school about what I wanted to do. And I think the earliest one I can remember is I said I wanted to be a mathematician, which is quite entertaining because you're like, what a weird kid. But also, some of that played out in reality. So maybe she wasn't so weird. I thought of a couple of other things when I was like coming towards college age and just nothing felt right. So I decided to do mathematics in college. And the reason that I did it was I enjoyed it. I didn't know what the job at the end of it was going to be. It felt like it was going to be general enough to give me a couple of different directions I might be able to go. And yeah, I guess I was buying myself a little bit of time at that stage. I went into it thinking, maybe I'll become a lecturer, maybe I'll do maths research, and that'll be a path forward. I'm not built for academia. I think I would be very bored. It's just not the environment or the pace that I like to work at. And I very quickly realized I didn't want to do finance, which was the direction a lot of math graduates went, into kind of actuary and financial math. But I wanted an application. I wanted something interesting to use math for. Like that was my driving motivation. So I went into a master's in cognitive science then because I had toyed around with doing psychology, have always been fascinated with psychology and human behavior. And I was like, well, we combine maths with that. So it was a lot of doing things I enjoyed, running away from things I didn't realistically, like, hey, hate that module next, kind of continuing to make decisions in that way. And I remember leaving my master's and saying, like, I wish there was a job where you could just build models to describe human behavior. Like, I wish I could do something like that. And obviously at that stage, like academia, they wanted me to do it in research. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I took a gap year. I spoke to some people. They were like, marketing has a lot to do with human behavior. And I was like, yeah, marketing seems so fun, so fascinating. Love that. So I went into a data science role in the gambling industry, which is much more mature in Ireland than it is in the US. It's been around for my entire life, even though I know it's very recently regulated over there. And I loved it because it was data science for marketing, but in such a fascinating industry from a psychological perspective, because like there is so much around win and loss and motivation and, hobbies and interests. And then you've got the marketing layers and all of that. So I loved that. Like I really, really did. And then I wanted to diversify across industries because I think I was afraid at that stage about becoming too specialized, to your point, about being like a gambling data science marketing expert. So I went into finance, and my biggest driver there, aside from changing industry, was stay close to the customers. That was what I wanted more than anything, was whatever the data projects are, I want to stay close to the customers because that's the interesting part. Like that's the psychology, that's the behavior of it. So I went from kind of pure online marketing into a sales and marketing department in a retail bank, which included like call centers around mortgages. And when you think about the difference of a product you're trying to sell, like a mortgage for home is a necessity. A bet on a football match is not a necessity by any measure. But I also love that comparison because it was like, okay, we are, even if it's the exact same type of model, like a customer value or churn or propensity to buy, you have a completely different set of factors and variables because now you have gone into needs-based versus wants-based. I avoided management for a really long time back then because, to your point about specialism, in data science, you're told you have to know everything technical to move ahead. And you can't manage other people if you don't know as much about them or as much about coding or as much about modeling or as much about data as them. And that was wrong. Like that was things that my managers were telling me. They were like, you need to know more than anyone you manage. And I believed them. And I probably held myself back from roles that would have suited me even better because I've always been really strong with stakeholders, really strong on the business side, like really interested in the 360-degree people. So leadership, colleagues, customers, employees. but I felt I had to do more model types and I had to learn more technical skills. And then I decided after banking, I was like, it's again like academia, not the pace that I enjoyed, not the culture I enjoyed. So I sought out tech as something that I felt I'd be a lot more interested in, a lot better suited to. And I took a gamble on a role that I was really not sure was for me because it was off my linear data science career path and it was into marketing effectiveness. And I started out there as a non-manager, even though I'd gone into management before. But it was a really fun job because it was for the whole gaming industry across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, advising companies that advertised on Facebook and Instagram on how to be better at analytics, data science, data strategy for decision making. And I think it's around then that I realized that one of the threads throughout all of the things that I had done from college straight through to all of my jobs was decision making. I love problem solving and I love decision making. Like those are the two things. And I feel like mathematics and data were just the tools that I was using for those things rather than being the point. And I think that has been a big driver of me in the last couple of years where I was really exposed to C-level in my work at Meta as they navigated industry shifts and them and their need to have to rebuild organizations and rebuild strategies because of shifts in data, shifts in technology. And I saw them navigate that and realized more often than not, it's not a technical or intellectual problem. It's a person problem when they can't make a change. And again, back to my psychology interest, that just fascinated me that I'm like, we all know what to do, but we're not doing it. Human beings are not rational. Human beings will never be rational. And you need to understand what they're going to do if you want them to do so effectively. So that's when I decided to do my MBA. I wanted to have that kind of broad view of the full organization, all of the moving parts, all of the interdependencies. Because I realized like you can go into somebody and say, spend another $1 million on your Meta advertising. That person doesn't make that decision in isolation. Like there is a finance officer who needs to be convinced of something. There is an analytics team who need to deliver something. You know, there's all of these things are part of an ecosystem and all of those people have different beliefs, biases, expertise, you know, preferences. And I think that's how I ultimately came in the direction of advisory, consulting, and fractional work is I love problem solving. I left Meta wanting broader problems to solve. And I left wanting to kind of help people just make better decisions. And sometimes those decisions are around people internally, which to me is operations. And sometimes those decisions are around people externally, and that's where the product comes in. So when you can kind of join the dots between the data and the people and the strategy, that's when I get really excited because I don't think anything can exist without any of those. So it was not too winding the road at the start. It all looked very planned. It was like I was born and said I want to be a data scientist for the first like 25 years. But it was after that when I started asking myself what next, I realized I was not going to be that specialist linear path that you talked about after a certain point, or what I used to call the guru on the hill. Because when a data scientist is a data scientist for 20, 30 years, they are a different level of, whereas I remember a manager saying, if you want to be the best data scientist, you have to stop going to meetings. You have to stop meeting with the business. Now, firstly, I also think he was wrong. But secondly, I was like, I don't want that job. I don't want to sit at my desk on my own, back office, build models, sit in the data and never see the impact of the model or the understanding of the business or the understanding of the customer. It's not going to be me. So I had to kind of find and carve out different angles from that for myself.
Yeah, that's fascinating. If you had to go back and talk to your 19-year-old self and you gave one piece of advice, not that you ever regret, but just more of an advice, what would that be?
I think it would be to just trust that there are different paths to where you want to go and that it's actually okay to pick the next thing without there being a longer term plan. Like, I think when you're in university and you're in school, there's this pressure to be like, what's your 5-year plan? Where do you want to be in 10 years? What are you working towards? And that's fine. But if the job market and, like fractional didn't even exist how many years ago? It wasn't a thing. So I couldn't have planned to do what I'm doing now. My entry point to a lot of the companies that I work with is through my knowledge of data and AI. They just want my lens on the problems that they're trying to
Yeah.
solve. I don't think I could have foreseen any of that when I was 19. So I think teenagers, young adults need to give themselves that freedom to say, okay, see your career as not a straight line. See it as something that you can intentionally enrich in a lot of different ways. And the more experiences you get, not just experience as in 5 years, 10 years, but various experiences, the more valuable you'll be, but enjoy the route there as well. Like, I think we can give ourselves a lot of anxiety when the destination is all we're thinking about. And it's like, I have to get this, do this, go at this pace. Whereas I think I would tell 19-year-old Kate, just enjoy the path to it, and whatever will be, will be.
Awesome. Yeah, mine's two words to my 19-year-old self. It's buy Bitcoin, but I'm kidding. When we have some parents, right, that listen to the podcast, and if they have kids that are coming of age, they're thinking about career, they're thinking about school. Any recommendations on the type of skill sets that you think are going to be super valuable over the next 5 to 6 years?
I truly believe, regardless of what profession you go into, even as a consumer, as a non-technical professional, or as a technical professional, there's going to need to be a level of tech and data literacy. I think that needs to start earlier. I have so many conversations with people about accuracy, and I don't think anybody has any idea what it means in the context of machine learning and AI. So I think I would love if my mother, if she's using ChatGPT, had some level of literacy about what it's doing in the background. Like, she doesn't need to know the ins and outs of it, but if she sees something funny, she needs to be critical. She needs to know enough to be discerning about output. And that is a person sitting at home just consuming AI. So I think anyone in any profession should have a level of tech and data literacy. I think that would be really, really shrewd. Beyond that, I think like problem solving and influence are two skills that will benefit everyone. So whatever new jobs appear that we don't know about now, or whatever adjustments happen to the jobs and careers we do know about, if you refine your problem solving skills and you refine your influencing skills, I think you'll be okay. Because early in my career, if younger data scientists asked me what should I learn, I'd say Python or SQL or random forest or, Bayesian, something super technical. Now, if a junior data scientist asks me what they should learn, I say sales skills, because communication, clarity, and influence will make you better at having impact as a technical person. I think engineers need to be better at it. I think it is an understanding of other people that will set you apart even as a technical person. So I think if younger people, regardless what subjects they choose in college or what early careers they pursue, if they can start to build on, okay, do I see myself as a strong problem solver? Do I see myself as somebody who can exert influence if I need to? And do I have a strong baseline understanding of data and technology and how they show up in my domain or my profession? Then I think that's what's going to be the most important cores.
That's solid. Thank you for that. At Meta, you had a front row seat to huge data sets, sophisticated advertisers, customer behaviors. Our listeners, they're grinding away in sales every day, and they want to start aligning their overall effort with customer behaviors. Can you give us some first steps that anyone in sales or marketing, just kind of like, what are the beginning steps to recognizing customer behavior? Maybe they don't have access to the large data set, at their job, but how can they start to become more customer centric? What are some tips that maybe any salesperson could start employing this week?
I think one thing that anyone in sales and marketing can do is look outside of the part of the user journey or the funnel that they're involved in and make sure that they understand the full thing. Because I think often there's a fragmentation of responsibility. I will acquire the customer and you will retain the customer. I will get them in the door and you will get them to increase their spend. And that creates a wall of between the understanding of both people. And it's always a pity. It always reduces the efficacy of both people. I know a lot of marketing professionals who go, as long as they deliver value in the first 7, 30, 60 days, that's all I'm gold on. And I see sales professionals who don't know where the customer originally came from, discovered the product, whatever it might be, because, that they got them at a later stage in the journey. I would love if every sales and marketing professional understood the start to end, even just at a top level. What does the customer see, experience, go through? Because I think it can just make us more empathetic and it can give us more context. And that's not a big data thing. That's a small data thing. It's like, okay, what are the touch points? Like, what is the actual path? And then I would say just ask more questions and challenge your own assumptions. I think sometimes there can be confirmation bias when we get a customer that looks like what we thought our customer would look like. And what that confirmation bias tells us is our targeting was right, the problem solution fit was right, what we built was perfect, all of these things. But as we talked about Grok 2, people don't use things the way that we would expect them to use things. And if we hold on to our assumption of how our customer is going to use our product, we cut off our ability to improve the product in the way they actually use it. So they may bring in a product that we built for a certain workflow, but it may fit somewhere different in what they're doing. And if we never ask them, like, what was positive about your onboarding? What was surprising about where this fit? Which parts of the product do you use most and who does it? We will never be able to deliver the service to them that we need to. A lot of the work that we did in terms of helping our clients become more data literate was actually really simple insights. Like, I think everybody expects the most sophisticated big data, AI, machine learning. But it's like, okay, do you understand the makeup of your customer base? Not just the customers you are serving, but all of the customers that your company has. Do you understand how your customers represent the rest? Are they standard? Are they different? Are they the same? And do that kind of insights work as much as you possibly can to say, like, okay, I've got a bigger client than most. My client takes more time. My client uses the product at a different frequency. Because I think if we can build a contextual baseline, which is, here's what we believe people will do, here's what the majority are doing, and here's what my customers are different, then that's where we get good at being customer centric, is like just understanding how they compare. We can do that with big data and we can do it with small data, we can do it with conversations, but I think it's about looking up and looking around is the most important first step.
I love that answer. Thank you so much. The ability to listen is often called the secret weapon of sales. Like, if you're just a really good listener, you can be a great salesperson if you can ask the right types of questions. And I actually find generative AI to be extremely helpful in that, where I'll give it details and context about maybe a prospect, the industry, their role, their KPIs, industry challenges, whatever the case may be, and say, based on this, give me some open-ended questions I can start asking them that lead to their KPIs. Because if I'm asking about things that are generally important to them, if I'm calling on a CRO, revenue growth is going to be important to them, right? I mean, there's nuances for each company for sure, but there's some general things, softballs, that you can get them to open up with. And if you're listening and asking those right questions, you start to understand the whole customer, like you said. And then if you understand that journey, then you start to see where even other products that maybe weren't meant for that do fit for what their needs are, versus the predisposition or bias, as you mentioned, that you had at the beginning of the conversation, where you're like, this is a fastball down the middle. I know exactly what they need, and I'm just going to go show up and puke on them.
And like with SaaS products, generally people use a very small amount of the features available. And that can ultimately be a reason for churn. If somebody comes in and says that's not worth the money we're paying for it because, there's a simpler one out there. So I think it's really important for us to stay finger on the pulse of the reality versus our impression. And I love that you use ChatGPT to give you questions instead of answers, or instead of, phrases and hooks and pitches, because I think that that's the difference. It's like we can't replace the questions. Like we can't commoditize the information. It has to be, you have to leave space for there to be something that you hadn't thought of. And like we often think about, like you said, it's going to be revenue. Like broadly, people care about revenue. But it's back to that irrational point, which is, but an individual might have a revenue goal over a different period of time than you're anticipating. They may have an incentive on a specific KPI that you're not expecting. They may be being beaten over the head with a productivity metric that you don't know about. And if those things come in hot and heavy at the end of a quarter, then your customer might start operating in a way that you don't expect, that doesn't make sense. You may think it's about your product, but it's about the fact that something else is going on. And I think that that is the most important point of customer understanding and customer obsession, is to assume things are going to be different than you expected them to be, and to be able to identify when things change.
Yeah, and you've talked about like the 360 of the customer, and I love that, like a 360 survey, or just kind of thinking about that. Like, what are all those dimensions that your customer is going through? Like we think, oh, they had a great quarter. I saw their investor relations page or quarterly reports, but they're under extreme pressure in other areas that we may not be aware of. So building that relationship, listening, understanding, knowing their fiscal year, when their quarter ends, and when those pressure points can be is vitally important. So I love that.
Yeah.
From a marketing perspective, you've seen the biggest, the baddest, right? From a meta perspective of who's done it extremely well, very sophisticated, huge budgets, AI behind the scenes, all of that. What are some tips for B2B and B2C outreach that you think are working today, and some things that are not working so well today? There's a lot of tradition in sales and marketing of, we need to send out email blasts and campaigns and email sequences and this and that. And we just kind of churn that same route a lot, and things move. The market moves, where the eyeballs and the attention move. Any tips or tricks on kind of what you're seeing as you're doing some of your fractional experience, and then also just from your marketing background?
Yeah. I think particularly in the B2B space at the moment, there is a lot of AI washing. There is a lot of leading with the term AI to describe the product, and being more solution focused than problem focused. And I think that we need to get back to being pain point focused. And here's how I can solve your problem. And maybe I'll do it with AI, maybe I won't, but like it's about the problem. And I think there's this race to have the best AI, the most AI, the most prominently positioned AI, whatever it is. So AI is in the subject header of those emails, and AI is in the reach out, and AI, and it's like, okay, but like in a sea of AI, why are you different than that? And you will only be different if you're problem focused. And whether it's, your client's problem or their customer's problem or the industry problem or whatever you're keeping an eye on, it's leading with that. It's the empathy, it's the understanding of, you have a pain and I think I can help you with it. And I think that when we have a tech hype in particular, we can lose sight of that, because we feel like we need to label things with the latest buzzword, either so investors pay attention to us or so that we can compete with others in our industry. And I think really at the end of the day, you're selling to a person, and that person may come to you and say, give me a blurb so I can tell my leadership how you're using AI. And that's fine, like do that. But I think ultimately it's, how can I solve your problem as a company and your problem as an individual buyer? Like what I can do for you that somebody else can't do? So I think on the B2B side, that's where I've seen a little bit, people have gone too far into the technology first and away from the problem first. On the B2C side, I think we have to be careful about optimizing towards mediocrity if we trust in AI and data more than thinking about the unmeasurables in between. So there is a quote that I'm obsessed with, which is not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And that is really hard for marketers to deal with. But the reality is, marketers have always had this friction point with their CFOs where there isn't a shared language of how do we justify our expenditure. And that hurts me because as a marketing effectiveness professional, I was talking about something that CFOs should love: incrementality. Things, money that would not have happened if we had not run this marketing. That's exactly what a finance professional wants. But there's a fear from marketing professionals that if it's not deterministic, if it's not really cleanly counted, then they don't know how to justify it. And I feel like we've gotten to a data first place in B2C marketing, which is where we were aiming for. It should be a welcome home that we've been en route to for a while. But I think in doing so, we've dropped some of the magic and we've over-trusted some of the data that's really not that strong. And there's almost an availability bias, which is if data exists, then good. If data doesn't exist, then bad. And that's taking the strength out of some of the differentiation in marketing. Like that's taking the human intuition that we talked about before with salespeople out of the mix, because we need both. Marketing is about people, it's about behaviors. We spoke about that already. Customers are not rational. Not everything will happen as planned, as expected. And for that reason, we can't measure and count things perfectly. So to marketing leaders on the B2C side, I would say set your teams up to do both, to do the short-term, perfectly measured, tactical, optimization, efficient work, but to also have space for innovation, for the heart of marketing, for the longer term bets, for the, being different to the competitors, for the less predictable, because you need a bit of both for longevity. You can't be constantly obsessed with the ROI I can measure tomorrow, because companies don't last for 20 years based on ROI that you can measure in 24 hours. It's just not the case. So that's kind of what I would say to the two different sides of the coin.
Yeah, fantastic. The AI washing, I read in a Medium article that you recently put out as a long overdue term.
Yeah.
For sprinkle a little AI on it. And I think that one of the things we hear too is AI is a black box.
Yeah.
And I also read or heard on a podcast that you were featured on previously about how you are on a global task force to demystify AI. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like and what you found?
Yeah. So when I was in Meta, the majority of the clients that I worked with were mobile gaming advertisers. So you've got your mobile apps like Candy Crush and Words with Friends and all of those kind of very, very popular games. Mm-hmm. Those companies grew up on Facebook and Instagram. Like they barely existed before those platforms did. And a large percentage of their share of wallet in advertising went on to social media advertising, display advertising. And I used to call them mathematicians with marketing budgets, because they had so much data, user level, real time, spoiled, if you compare them to CPG and retail. They had everything at their fingertips. And what that meant was they were experts in optimization more than they were experts in marketing. Like they lived and breathed the algorithm. Unfortunately for us, what that meant was if there was a change to the algorithm, they sometimes noticed before we did. It would be in their reports within a couple of hours that something wasn't right. And this made some salespeople really concerned, because they were like, we should understand our auction. And I was like, well, we do understand our auction, but our auction sits on top of an AI that we don't get a report out of it on a fax machine that said this was the rule set. Like it's gone way beyond the complexity of a decision tree. It is not as simple as if this, then that. Mm-hmm. If it was, it would be a set of rules. We would publish them. It would be beautiful and everyone would be so happy. But that's not the way it works. So because I was working with those advertisers, we very quickly identified a need to do what we called auction education, but what was really a demystifying of how to get the best of a black box system that's going to change. So you will have your list of best practices or rules or, favorite campaign structures this month. And in a few months, something will change in the system for a good reason, but you will have to adjust. So that was a really interesting project because we got a couple of engineers and data scientists that were involved in the product. And then we got some people from marketing science who were involved in client experimentation and client testing, and combined those skill sets together to say, okay, what do we know about what changes in a positive way when, and what are the ways that actually we should interact best with this? And obviously that changed from advertiser to advertiser in terms of like how much data were they feeding in, how many conversions actually took place for that advertiser. So for a mobile gaming advertiser, big data. For a retail advertiser, maybe not so much. There's not going to be a lot of signal sent through the machine. And we wanted to get to a place where we could say, here is what feeds the machine in a good way, and here is what actually interrupts the machine in a negative way and leads to drops in efficiency. So one thing that we worked on with them was gaming advertisers would like to be lifetime value driven in terms of, okay, we will spend more money on acquiring a customer who will ultimately actually spend in the game, which is a rare event. I do. That's my secret shame. I do spend money in mobile games sometimes, but not everybody does. But those are hard to find. So one of the reasons they love Meta advertising and Google advertising is it can help them identify that small 3% of people that will ever spend money in the game, and it'll essentially pay for the rest of the customers. But they were optimizing towards 7-day return on ad spend to guarantee themselves a return and to be in this lovely cash flow positive cycle. But what they were doing was really narrowing how many consumers they could get their ads in front of. Because if you ask the system, show me only people who are going to spend money in the game 7 days after they install it, you're going down a very narrow path. If you add more restrictions to your campaign, you're narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. And it may look ROI positive, but it is not giving the space for the algorithm to learn and find new pockets of opportunity. And it is not giving you top level profitability and growth in the same way that it is giving you individual ROI on a one-to-one basis. So we were able to give them, don't interrupt the learning of the algorithm by making too many changes. Don't over narrow, the amount of data you send through, the rules that you apply on top of an already powerful system, and just different things like that. And yeah, it was a really interesting project group because it was like, firstly, very uncomfortable and things people didn't want to talk to clients about. They were like, we're going to tell our clients we don't understand our system. And I was like, is that not part of AI literacy? Is like, we're all in this together. This is a very complex machine. We know it's accurate, but it's accurate for what you've asked for. If you want to interact well with the machine, you need to realize it's accurate for what you've asked for and no more than that. And I think it actually got us to some really good conversations and feedback from customers to make the system better. So yeah, all in all, it was a great experience, and I think has really reshaped my thinking about how do we interact with AI, because we have to take responsibility for understanding when we interact with very sophisticated machines.
Yeah, it brings us back to like the top of our conversation when we talked about misconceptions that AI is new. And there's an education factor that we're going to be going through for the next couple of years at a corporate level across businesses, just getting that education of like, how does this work? How does it work most appropriately? When is it good to use? When is it not
Yeah.
good to use? Like, where does the current limitations of AI today, and where do we bounce up against those boundaries at times? And where are we like safe
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
much as we can be within the AI, that these are the things that it's highly tuned or really good at for this current use case. You want to start doing some of this other stuff. Again, it may not be AI, it just might be a machine learning model that you need to
Yeah.
build. So it's understanding those use cases. But I do see what you went through is what is going to have to happen from these foundation models and from service providers or SaaS companies or whomever, to really educate the customers on what is this technology, that it isn't brand new, it's been around
Yeah.
a long time, but here are the boundaries of
Yeah.
understanding.
And here are the risks that are worth taking versus not. And I think, like, if I think about one reason why marketing is probably at the stage of maturity that it is, it's because companies probably saw it as low risk versus other parts of the organization, like finance or, something like that, that people are like, okay, where are we willing to have some wrongness? Like, where does it not hurt? And legal is not one of those places. So I think that we've already been doing a top-down version of this, which is where do we deploy it all? And I think that we will have to do it in a more micro way now, which is like on a case-by-case basis. Because, like, when I think about accuracy of models, I don't think people always unpack the aggregate accuracy scores and say, for example, is this as accurate for every cohort of customers if we think about the marketing use case? And if it's not, should we only deploy the AI for certain cohorts, or do we just take the hit on the accuracy? Because we have all seen the various different horror stories of AI that is great for white faces and is not for other ethnicities, or that is great for men and is not for women. And I think that we need to get better at some stage in the production process saying, do we need to not deploy the AI because even though it's quote unquote accurate at an overall level and it improves some metric, it can be harmful for certain cohorts or it can have unintended consequences. And I think that we need to get more granular in how we ask those questions than we have been in the past.
It makes a lot of sense. Thinking of like just kind of fast forwarding a few years into the future, any predictions or concepts that you think would be interesting for the listeners to start considering? You've kind of seen this grow up over the years. You've been a part of the data science, which was early days. Things were, NLP was a lot harder than it is today and a lot more expensive. Intelligent tutoring, like all of these different aspects of AI, but just where we're at. I mean, this trajectory right now, we're on a rocket ship, super accelerator. We're getting new models all the time, ground's moving underneath our feet. They're getting better reasoning capabilities, this kind of like, step-by-step tree of thought, chain of thought, like reasoning is starting to be built in to the models. Just things for the listeners to start to consider that in a couple years, we may have these types of capabilities, just to help people start to consider some of the future aspects and what's exciting.
Yeah, like one of the things I'm most excited about is, and I think a lot of the way I think about AI and what I'd like to see from AI is almost, I don't know if this is a good way to think about it, a reversing of some of the bad things that we've seen from AI in the past. So if I think about a lot of the pain and challenges that have been caused by social media, it is because of a lot of misinformation that was able to travel because of the algorithms that were optimizing towards, things you want to see, content type machines. I would love to see AI be deployed for verification more than that. So I think that moving from large language models to smaller language models, where we are absolutely sure, to your point earlier, that there is verified evidence in the data that is feeding it. Like, I think about the Google and Reddit partnership as the opposite of where we should be headed, which is, can we stop worshipping more data and volume of data yes, it makes the model more powerful. Yes, it absolutely makes the model easier to build. Does it make the model better, or does it give us something else? And I think that I always think about this through a lens of data, but I don't think people always ask the right questions about the data. And it's what data makes this better, not just bigger. Do we have permission to use that data? Is a question we only seem to ask about individuals and not about creators and authors and, research publications and things like that. And I think we're going to go through an evolution of legislation and partnership agreements and different things like that in the next couple of years, that hopefully when we come out the other side, there is a mutually beneficial landscape for, you have written an excellent book on this topic. You will be remunerated for it being fed into, GPTs on that topic, so that, to your point, your generalists are getting really good information. But the people who wrote the stuff, the specialists, are also getting compensated for that. So I think I would like to see us moving to a more data critical place for the benefit of better models rather than more models and bigger models. So I think our yardstick of what good looks like needs to change.
Okay. Do you think that companies will start to look at the sovereignty of their data and move AI, small language models, fine-tuned to their data in-house, meaning super secure private cloud or directly in a data center that they control, versus sending to a large provider like cloud provider?
I think a lot will, because I think that there is already an uneasiness with even just asking questions to ChatGPT. Is like, what kind of competitive information am I giving away? And we had that with advertisers on Meta. We had a lot of discomfort with, I will benefit if I share my data, but so will my competition. That will come back up again, is like, how do we build a wall around it so that it's safe for, the people who own the data, whether that's an individual or a company, but also so that it's competitive. I think that data is the competitive advantage, particularly because companies have gotten so generous. There's this development around open source. It is an acceleration of, all of the foundational models that you've mentioned, all of the code and things like that. I don't think for the next few years, the models are really going to be the differentiator. They will become that way again when, certain use cases are just so difficult that people crack them. But I think data is the competitive advantage. So protecting it, like you said, having it absolutely closed off from outside sources, but also making sure it's good data. We have such a tendency of people to think more is always better. And we love skipping the steps to make sure that it's quality and, actually done well. So I think the data piece has to come. And I do think it's likely to come as like my data, my house.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to think about how we built websites. We posted our content on blogs and on Medium and on Twitter and Facebook and Meta and so on. And it was all about sharing and becoming a thought leader, or our company wanted to be found on Google from a search perspective. Yep. And now you're seeing things like Twitter close down scrapers, right? So that as their content is growing, they can use that for a Grok model, but they can use it for their own ecosystem. And it's valuable, versus making it completely publicly available to be scraped. We're already seeing it with Beautiful Soup, which is a Python library that you can scrape websites.
Beautiful Soup. I used that for an interview assignment longer ago than I would like to say.
Well, if you want to be really blown away, use Gina, Jina. Way cooler. It'll scrape. It doesn't get blocked like Beautiful Soup, and it puts it into Markdown that's LLM ready. So that's a really fun
hot tip.
Yeah. So now we're geeking out on data science, but things like Beautiful Soup are already being blocked. So, I think that we may see this kind of movement towards, we're not going to let these things scrape our data. We're going to keep it contained, our robot.txt file or whatever the future is.
Yeah.
And that disrupts a lot of models like Google and things like that, where you're searching. Typically, you want to be found, and it might just be a different way. And maybe you get the data to an LLM or something like that, because they're starting to build that capability that gives you the answer to what you're looking for versus a whole list of ads plus things. So there's a lot of interesting things, I think, over the next few years that we'll see play out.
We've gone through, like, people feel like social media, the internet have been around for a very long time because certainly our generations have worked with them for so long. But in the grand scheme of things, humans have not interacted with them for that long. And I think we are still figuring out what we're comfortable with, how they fit into our lives, like what control we want somebody else to have. Like, I see this all of the time with the conversations about hate speech and censoring on platforms like X, like Meta. One person says, I want to see everything. How dare you censor? And another person says, that's hate speech. Like, why would you show that to me? People don't agree on these things. And it's, do you want a government to intervene? Do you want a tech company to decide for you, or do you want to decide for yourself? And I think we are going to go through what we have gone through with consumer data and data comfort and privacy, with also commercial and kind of more enterprise data, which is, what is my business model? Is it openness or not? Like, where does this benefit me? How am I capitalizing on this? And then the intersection of that with what the consumers want and need. Because I often think about the Tesla, the parked recording capability that they have, and the fact that even as restrictive as European data privacy rights are, they don't really cover for peer-to-peer yet. We haven't gotten to a point where every single use case is considered, because the minute that Tesla stopped sharing recordings from that dash cam back to HQ, the data privacy became the driver of the car to the passerby. And that's not covered anywhere. Nobody has a sign up here if you're okay with me using this data. So there's so much we still already don't know to even ask. Like, the unknowns still exist. But I do think it's going to be business model innovation that is very focused on open versus closed, and the intersection of that with individual privacy and consent. And I think where we want to get to, hopefully in 5 years, if not less, is a place of comfort and control. Like, here is what I want and here is what I can actually impact, because otherwise it's going to be social media all over again. It's going to happen to people instead of them being part of the decision.
I could talk to you for probably 6 hours straight. Not sure anyone else would listen, but I could definitely be.
Just the two of us, bro.
This is so fascinating. This has been an amazing conversation. I really just want to thank you sincerely for stopping by to chat with me today. If our listeners want to reach out to you online, where's the best place for them to head?
I think probably LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. And if not, then my website, kate-minogue.com. They can find and get in contact with me there.
Awesome. Thanks again. This has been a very insightful episode of the SaleSage Podcast, where again, we explore AI and revenue enablement with some of the top minds in the world, like our guest today. Thanks again, Kate.
Thanks so much, Brooks. It was great chatting to you.
That's it for today's episode of the SaleSage Podcast. Remember, the game has changed. Now it's your turn to tip the scales in your favor with AI as your secret weapon. Keep pushing the boundaries, and we'll see you next time. If you like what you hear, please leave a positive review on our podcast and share it with your peers. Please also visit our website at salesage.ai to learn more about equipping your sales teams with AI superpowers.